Hello and welcome back to another episode of Degesch America Presents. I am your host, Ben Harrell, and as always, I'm so glad that you joined us. Last episode, we talked with Bob Warren about stored product pests and how to gauge when it's time to fumigate. There are a lot of variables that play a part in deciding when it's time to take action, and I'm really glad that Bob and I had a chance to discuss those options. If you haven't had a chance yet, please feel free to go back and give that episode a listen. I think you'll enjoy it. Okay, in these next few episodes, we're going to talk about the three most prevalent fumigants used in the United States: phosphine, sulfuryl fluoride, and methyl bromide. Did you know that phosphine is one of the most widely used fumigants? Phostoxin fumigant was created by Degesch scientists in 1951 and granted a U.S. FIFRA registration in 1958. There are also a few different types of products on the market that utilize phosphine as their active ingredient, and each of these products have some pretty specific differences. Today, we've invited Herb Yeaman, president of Degesch America, to join us to discuss phosphine. Herb's worked for Degesch for 37 years, and considering Degesch America is the only U.S. manufacturer of metal phosphide products, he has loads of experience with the molecule. I'm so glad that we're going to get an opportunity to pick his brain when it comes to phosphine use in the United States. So please help me welcome Herb to the podcast. Herb, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ben. Appreciate it.
Yeah, glad I was able to get to sit down with you and pick your brain about phosphine. I think this is going to be fun.
Well, we'll hope. Hopefully, I got some information worth sharing.
Oh, I know you do. So I want to start out just for anybody who's listening who doesn't know who you are. I just wanted to start out by just giving you an opportunity to kind of tell us a little bit about yourself, your history with the company, and who you work for, and so on. So.
Okay. Well, I'll give you a little bit of background. Many moons ago, back in my college days, I actually had a summertime job working with a local fumigation company. It was a mother pop operation that fumigated tobacco warehouses. So hot, nasty work, but paid well, and as a college student, that's what you're looking for. So as I moved on and graduated from college, I walked out with a degree in biology, and I found a job with the Virginia Department of Agriculture and became a state food inspector, which actually entailed quite a bit of responsibilities, but we were farmed out to FDA through grants to the state in order for them to help gain coverage into the food processing areas that were in the state of Virginia. So my background came from there, but as time went on and the government associations and relationships became much more strained, then I had an opportunity to come back to the fumigation world, but not as a fumigator, as an inspector to conduct sanitation audits within the tobacco industry. So the idea then, and this was many years ago, close to 35 now, they wanted to be treated as if they were food establishments. And they wanted the unjaundiced view of someone who had done that type of work to come in there and review their processing operations and to issue an unofficial report, but they took it quite seriously in-house, which really took them light years ahead of where they are today, which they are now under the jurisdiction of FDA. So interesting full circle. So during my years as their inspector, the opportunity came for additional areas of expertise from the Degesch America group, which would include fumigation services. So not only did we supply them with fumigant, but then we began to actually supply them with the services to apply those fumigants. And they appreciated the fact that we were not only registrants, but service providers. And so we could cover a lot of territory for them. And to this day, I'm proud to say that we are still employed in the world of tobacco fumigations, as well as many other areas of fumigations. The company I started with was bought by the German group, the Degesch group, and they in turn purchased a few other smaller operations which were in the service business. So that's how we expanded as well into the grain applications, a lot of ocean-going vessel in-transit fumigations. So time progresses and we still continue to hold our head above water. We pride ourselves on setting the bar, the standard for safety, for services provided, and for quality of product. And I think that those are good things to hang your hat on. We just earlier today had an address from our CEO from Germany to express his kind regards to 4 employees that will be retiring this year, and some with as much as 43 years of service.
Wow.
So I think that speaks highly of the company, that you get quality people in, they stay with us. We try to treat everybody fairly, and we do a good job of that, I do believe. So,
yeah, that's great. That's great. Awesome. So the thing that we wanted to talk about with you today is obviously Degesch America is a manufacturer or supplier of metal phosphide products, which phosphine. And phosphine's been around for a long time. It's an absolutely terrific fumigant. So I wanted to pick your brain about phosphine in particular. This whole season on this podcast, that's all we're talking about is fumigation and how it works and some of the products that we work with. And so I wanted to get an opportunity to talk to you because you're definitely a veteran when it comes to the fumigation world.
You're being kind.
So I wanted to talk to you and just pick your brain a little bit about phosphine, because even though it's been around for a long time, we still get a lot of questions, especially from new fumigators, about phosphine. And so I just wanted to pick your brain a little bit. So, I'll just jump right in. I think one of the biggest questions that we get asked is, how does phosphine work, and why does it work so well?
Well, it's a really quite unique compound. People are always asking me that are certainly outside of this world of phosphine and metal phosphide fumigant use, that what is it that you do? And it's hard to explain, but yet it's simple to explain. We protect the food and consumer use products that are out there, and we do that through a very unique set of chemistry. The metal phosphides, of course, work through hydrolysis, reaction with atmospheric moisture, and whether depending on aluminum or magnesium, basically the process is pretty much the same. The magnesium acts a little quicker. But the phosphine that's produced is quite effective on all life stages of stored product insects and also other stored product pests. So it leaves no residue, which is good. And so it touches a lot of lives many different ways. I usually compare the bowl of Cheerios that would not have phosphine as an effective use pattern. You'd be eating them with a knife and fork.
Yeah.
You'd be chasing them around the bowl. So your wheat products and things of that nature, we touched your lives without you knowing it, and we like it that way. The idea is that we're not looking to make press. These are very dangerous compounds. They're restricted use pesticides. The gas is quite active and very effective, given the right concentrations. And the 3 parameters we always go by is the concentration versus the time of exposure at the correct temperature levels, which certainly affects the metabolism of the insect, are very, very important components. And those 3 pieces are what drives the effective use of our products. And so with that thought in mind, we've covered a lot of commodity around the world, even from the U.S. with export products, export grains going to other countries in transit fumigations.
Yeah, and one thing I want to mention, of course, this is the first fumigant that we're actually talking about on this season. We're going to talk about sulfurofluoride methylbromide as well on some future episodes. But with this being the first one, I wanted to ask you first, or at least make a comment. The thing that makes fumigants unique, there's a lot of different things that make fumigants unique compared to other pest control products, but one of the things that makes it the most unique to me is its penetrative quality.
Yes.
So we can use this on food commodities, and it can penetrate down into the grain mass safely, but still be able to kill the insects in areas where your standard pest control products can't.
Correct. It's a very small molecule, as I said earlier, and it's very, very active. So it wants to go to places where it isn't,
right?
Which is also one of the characteristics that we use to our advantage, but can also be a disadvantage, because without proper sealing, then you can't maintain the concentrations for the target species that you're after. So yes, very, very good penetrating capabilities, characteristics, just ever so slightly heavier than air. I compare it basically to cigarette smoke or charcoal smoke. I mean, just if you want a visualization, not an exact comparison, but very close. It doesn't really require air assistance in most instances, but we always have the option for mechanical assistance to the J system by recirculation, but that's probably saved for another podcast.
Right. Sure. Yeah. I'm a big fan of the J system. I've used the J system my entire career. I'm a Midwest boy. I grew up in the Corn Belt. I've done thousands of grain fumigations with metal phosphides, and yes, the J systems work fantastic when you need recirculation. I can't say enough about that. Another question I get asked a lot too, or I think is a big topic for the industry, is a lot of folks, they don't understand what the difference is. Well, they understand what the difference is between aluminum phosphide and magnesium phosphide, but they don't really, or they may not understand where each of them should be used and why those differences make them better for one particular fumigation as compared to another one. So can you just talk a little bit about the differences between aluminum phosphide and magnesium phosphide?
Sure. Well, the ALP products are aluminum phosphide pressed compounds. They come in a couple of different forms. We have a packaged form as well, but I think what you're referring to is maybe the pellets versus the tablets.
Yeah.
The pellets are 1/5 the size of a tablet. The tablets releases 1 full gram of phosphine per tablet. And of course, being that the pellet takes 5 pellets to make a tablet, then do the math.
Yeah, 1/5.
That's 1/5, exactly correct. So traditionally, the aluminum compounds are used where you can do direct addition of product without fear of the residual dust coming in contact in areas where it's not allowed per the label. Of course, the label is the law. And it does react a little bit slower. The hydrolysis process with aluminum phosphide is slower. So that can carry its own advantages as well, particularly if you're a Midwest farm boy climbing inside of a bin on a nice hot August day and you're trying to do an application without having to wear an SCBA. Then of course that would allow you that opportunity. But the magnesium compounds tend to what we call liberate the phosphine gas quicker due to the nature of the chemical compounds that make it up. So that can also have its advantage in a quicker rise to lethal concentrations and shorten with the total application times. So, and what I mean by that basically is that I can achieve the levels where I know I'm going to begin to see efficacious results quicker than I can with the aluminum compound.
Right.
But I think that they all have their place. And as I said, we have the aluminum press compounds. They also come in a packaged or prepackaged product. And I think hopefully most of the listeners are familiar with the pre-packs. And I think that they were designed to allow us to get the products, the pre-packs, into a material mass and be able to extract them from the mass being fumigated or the structure being fumigated without leaving the residual compounds behind.
Right.
And the residuals that are left, if properly exposed, they're considered to be a special waste. They're not a hazardous waste. There's a huge distinction between those two. And so, with the aluminum compounds, you have basically aluminum hydroxide or talcum powder left, and magnesium phosphide leaves magnesium hydroxide. So basically the pretty benign compounds that are left and materials that are found in the earth. But we can certainly handle disposal through a couple of different ways, and all these things are outlined in the manual. And when I say manual, I'm referring to not only the product or container label, but the applicator's manual, which is an extension of the container label.
Right.
And so, so when I say label, I'm talking about all 20-odd pages,
Yeah.
But you can't stick that on the outside of a flask or a pail or what
Sure.
have you. So.
Yeah, the thing that I find the most interesting, and I guess this is and I'm glad that you said everything that you said, because I agree 100%, of course, but you made a point to mention, the thing about, the question I get a lot of times is people say, well, why wouldn't I just always want to use magnesium phosphide if it's faster? because faster is always better, and that's not the case.
That's correct.
Sometimes slower is better. So I'm really glad that you addressed that and that you gave a scenario where slower may be better, because slower reacting means that you may not have to use the same level of PPE during the application process. And that's important in a lot of cases. So I'm definitely glad that you addressed that, because that's a question that we get asked a lot, because I think people in our industry have this preconceived notion that faster always equals better. And I don't think that that's the case at all.
No.
Slow and steady wins the race, in my opinion, when it comes to safety. And if you can achieve the same results with aluminum phosphide in a safer way because it's slower, I think that that's going to be your best option. So you have to weigh out these options, everybody, and make sure that you're taking that time into consideration and not always think that getting it done faster is always going to be the best option. That's the big takeaway that I got from that. So I'm definitely glad that you mentioned that.
A lot of the drive behind that is, of course, your customer, of course, is always wanting something done yesterday.
Yeah.
And then they want it back the day before yesterday.
Yeah.
But you cannot rush this process. And as I said, again, the three main factors are time, temperature, and concentration. So if you can't achieve those parameters, then there's no need to even bother to fumigate.
Yeah.
Because you're wasting your time, your effort, your money.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, because these are really dangerous compounds that we're working with, I mean, that's their intended use. They're supposed to be dangerous. They're used to kill insects. But because they're dangerous, it's really important that we monitor, not just for personal safety, but we also want to make sure, you yourself said that these molecules move fast. They always want to try to get to places that they're not.
Right.
And that's why taping and sealing is so important. So, to me, monitoring for safety and then also monitoring for efficacy are just extremely vital to guaranteeing that you're actually having a safe and efficacious fumigation. So why, I guess I kind of answered this question already, but I'll ask you anyway. So why is it important? Why do you think it's important for us to monitor for efficacy when we're fumigating with phosphine?
Well, I've said this before in front of multitudes of people over the course of my many, many years, but if you're not monitoring, then you have no idea what the concentration is. So all you're doing is an application of phosphine.
Right.
You're not fumigating. You're just applying phosphine. You don't know the result because you don't have any concentration readings. And just because you have a theoretical number based on your calculations to figure dosages, unless you're monitoring, actually physically monitoring the interior of whatever it is you're fumigating, whether it be a tarpaulin or a chamber or a warehouse or what have you, then you don't know what that concentration is. And without that piece of knowledge, then you can't understand what it is you're trying to achieve. And you're trying to achieve whatever X is. You start time zero at X, whether it be 200, 300 parts, whatever your target is, parts per million. And then that's when the clock starts, so that's where you begin your time. But before all that, you've already taken temperature. So you're doing all types of monitoring. You're monitoring for phosphine, you're monitoring for temperature, and you're watching the clock. So without all this information gathered, then you can't possibly be doing a fumigation. All you've done is a phosphine application.
Right, yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I do want to add something, and I know you'll agree with me on this. Another thing that I think that makes monitoring so important for efficacy, for safety, of course, is hands down, you have to monitor for safety. Yes. But monitoring for efficacy from a litigious perspective, I think, is vital as well. One of the phrases that I hear from Degesch America that I've heard for all the years that I've known of the company and worked with you guys is, if you don't document it, it didn't happen.
That's correct.
And I absolutely love that phrase because it's 100% true and accurate. If you can't prove you did it by documentation, then there's no proof that you did anything at all or that you were successful. And you have to be able to document these monitoring readings. If you don't document them, and for some reason the facility or the treated space gets a reinfestation, you don't have anything to fall back on to prove whether or not you were successful. And if you can't prove that, you're in big trouble. You're either going to repeat the fumigation for free or for a reduced rate, or there could be litigious things that come up.
That's correct.
Fumigation management plans and monitoring readings are pulled up into the court of law Not frequently, luckily, because we do a good job of monitoring, but it
I
does
can speak for us.
Yes, yes, but
Yes,
it does
we do.
happen occasionally. So, the last thing you ever want to do is have to get on a stand in a court of law and have them ask you, "Did you monitor for efficacy?" and to say no, because the whole case is done and over with right at that point. So,
Well,
you have to monitor to protect yourself as well.
As you rightly point out, I mean the FMP, or the Fumigation Management Plan, is a required written document.
Yes.
And it is part of the label, and it is federal law. So without these areas being documented properly, as you also said, not only just from an IH standpoint, but from an efficacious standpoint, then you can't fill in the blanks, so you're basically violating the label.
Yeah, absolutely.
So without it, and and more, not so much now, but more in the past, where people have called and said, "Hey, your product doesn't work," and the very first question I normally ask is, "Well, what were your readings?" And when they either hang up, or I hear nothing but silence on the phone, or "Oh, I got some," then you say, "Well, if you don't mind, can you share your FMP with me?"
Yeah.
That way I can help you go through, and we can hopefully identify some areas that we might be able to address better to give you more positive results. So that usually starts a whole nother conversation.
Sure, yeah. No, I like that. All right, so I mean, we already said phosphine's been around for a long time,
Yes.
and it's been massively successful the entire time it's been around. However, there have been some discussions over the last several years about insects becoming resistant
Yes.
to phosphine. So I just wanted to kind of pick your brain and kind of ask you a little bit about what phosphine resistance is, and then just maybe pick your brain and ask you, some questions on how we combat phosphine resistance and keep that molecule viable into the future years.
Right. Well, there's been a lot of talk over many years, actually even back in the mid to late '60s, about insect pesticide resistance. And I think the more I've heard, the more I've tried to educate myself and realize that certainly there's a huge difference between tolerance and resistance.
Yeah.
And that many organisms become tolerant to multitudes of chemical stress, whether it be bacteria to antibiotics, or whether it be pesticides to insects. And this tolerant capability is different from species to species, and even within the species. As I always point out, we're all like snowflakes. Everybody's a little different, and and that theory applies into the animal world as well. But the tolerance, I think, has helped lend itself to pick out the easier to eradicate, and leaving the stronger to survive. And I think in turn that has led to some resistant capabilities. And I normally refer to them as susceptible and non-susceptible.
Sure.
It's just
I like that.
It's a fancier way of saying it.
I like that, though.
But basically, and yes, I mean, resistance has come more and more to the forefront. There's been a lot of work that's been done on it. There have been some identifications of some mechanisms within certain species that allow them to detoxify the chemical when it's in there. So you're getting down to the micro level of this stuff. We won't get into too much of that, mainly because I'm not capable of talking about it. But when you find that these animals are able to metabolize the phosphine and it's not toxic to them, then I think the tolerance has led to the genetic mutation, which truly is a resistant capability to pass along those genes.
Right.
So I've kind of talked in circles around this, but I think that it goes without saying that the two are certainly related. The more I read, the more I see that it's not incorrect to say that tolerance may very well lend itself to resistance, that you have to have both components. You have to have the tolerance component to lead itself to resistance. And this, I'm certainly not a scientist that is capable of even addressing those scenarios. But as I said, I've been trying to educate myself more and more with the literature that's out there, and this is what we're seeing. You have to have the tolerance first before you'll go on to the resistance.
Right, right. And the thing that I find that's interesting is, I mean, of course, the knee-jerk reaction, which is almost never the correct response.
Right.
The knee-jerk reaction is to just switch to a different chemical, and I don't think that that's the right answer to that. And I'm glad that our industry, there's many scientists and professionals in our industry that are working on alternative methods of using phosphine to continue to keep that molecule effective even against phosphine-resistant strains. I think we're able to change our application methods,
Right.
maybe our hold times, maybe our application levels, the parts per million that we're setting up, target concentration. So I think there's a lot of things that we're doing to show that phosphine is still extremely viable across the board. And that's the thing I like about our industry is, even though we're seeing some tolerance and resistance, we're finding new and innovative ways to continue to use this molecule and be very successful with it.
Right, exactly. I mean, and you hit the nail on the head. I mean, we've been privileged, Degesch America has been privileged to be part of a science group that's been based mainly in the world with tobacco. It's called Caresta, and they have done exhaustive work over different treatment schedules and what's most effective and so forth. Targeting, methodology for the non-susceptible species of insects, particularly their bug of interest is the cigarette beetle. But there's been a great deal of work and dependent upon the temperature again and the concentration, then the time factor comes in. So there's several different treatment schedules that are available, and the science that's been done is good, strong, sound science. The tobacco industry has led the way in that, and even to the point where USDA has picked up some of those treatment schedules and put them in their PPQ manual. So, and speaking of USDA, I mean, there's a lot of research done out in California by some very good scientists, a very good group of people that have identified the fact that yes, we can control the strong, non-susceptible species. Many different types of insects, and they refer to it as the sweet spot.
That was the next thing I was going to ask about.
And we'll give credit where credit is due. Dr. Spencer Walsh and his team have done a great deal of work and have shown that given the right circumstances with the right parameters, temperature, and the proper concentration with the right amount of time, we can control the non-susceptibles. It's just a matter of making sure that we put together a proper fumigation management plan,
Sure.
and then we follow our own plan.
Yes.
And so,
yes.
and then we monitor.
Yes.
So all the important factors.
Yeah. So speaking of the sweet spot, again, we talked. I mentioned earlier that faster's not always better, and I'll say the same thing with regards to the sweet spot. The higher concentration rate isn't always better either.
Correct.
Really, there's a sweet spot for phosphine across the board for most insects. And by the way, before we get too much into this, I do also want to say this before I lose my train of thought. We talked about phosphine, susceptible, non-susceptible insects. I don't want to give anybody the wrong impression. This isn't a widespread issue. It's not like we have
Correct.
wide swaths of non-susceptible insects in the United States. I mean, we're talking about a very narrow band of insects. So I don't want to make it sound like phosphine doesn't work because all these insects are becoming non-susceptible. That's not the case at all. We're talking about a very, very narrow field of insects where we're starting to see some of that. So what I would suggest for folks to do if they suspect that they may have some non-susceptible strains is to contact us or contact somebody else, and we can have a discussion and talk through it and communicate and figure out whether or not that's the case. Again, making sure is the first step.
Sure, and this is why we stress the fact of, as you said earlier, sealing up a structure or a tarpaulin and what have you is so important to get those concentrations where they need to be and maintain those concentrations.
Yep.
And so, again, you can't do it without monitoring, and if you don't monitor, you have no idea what's going on within the given structure.
Yeah. So, what is the sweet spot then?
Well, as it's been defined to me through the literature, we're looking at about, and I'm just going to throw the number out there, but it doesn't have to be exact, but somewhere around 750 ppm of phosphine.
Okay.
It could go in the 500 range, but then of course you have to be real real careful with maintaining. You don't want to get down below that, and you don't need to go super duper high. I mean, more gas doesn't make them more dead. Matter of fact, it can have just the deleterious effect by creating a narcotic effect, which is it's a whole other set of circumstance. But it appears that Dr. Walsh and his group have identified that magic number of 750 parts per million.
Yeah, and I that's a nice, good number.
Right.
I've had many successful phosphine fumigations with metal phosphides at 750 parts per million. So I definitely agree with Dr. Walsh on that.
Right.
It's a very good number. Now you mentioned you briefly mentioned what happens if you go above that number, and just for those of you who are listening, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I would liken it almost to like a hibernation.
Yes.
The insects, they almost sense that they're being exposed to something extremely deadly, so they shut down almost at a metabolic level. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Yeah, and they just go into a narcosis. And so, I mean, when they shut down, there's no uptake of gas. And of course, if they don't get the uptake of gas into their system, then virtually it's ineffective at that point. But that being said, though, I mean, it's still, there's a lot of work being done, a lot of work still that needs to be done. There'll always be amazing phenomena in the insect world for sure. But,
yeah, and insects are such amazing creatures that they can even do something like that to drop into that narcosis state when they're kind of quote sensing some kind of a danger to themselves. It's just interesting. Insects are really interesting when it comes to that. So I don't have too much left for you now. I've bothered you enough, but
you haven't bothered me.
I just want everybody that I interview or that I talk to for this podcast, I always like to ask them this, because we're starting to see, at least right now, this is 2020, we're starting to see this transition where a lot of the fumigators in the industry are starting to retire, and we're starting to see this transition of new fumigators coming into the market more and more. And I think that's going to continue at least over the next three to 5 years or so. As we start transitioning into this new breed of fumigator or this new wave of fumigators. So I want to ask you, what kind of advice would you give a new fumigator, fresh to the industry? They may not even have a fumigation license yet. Somebody that's brand new to the industry. What advice, and it can be more than one piece, but what advice would you give to that brand new fumigator just starting out?
Well, interesting question. As I said earlier in the very first part of this, I didn't start out to become a fumigator myself.
Right.
I went to college to get just a general biology degree and figure out what I could do with it from there. But it evolved into this, and I realized that to be a fumigator, you have to want to be a fumigator. You don't just they don't hang on trees. There's no university for fumigators yet, but it's an evolving process. So without the thirst for the knowledge of the industry, and without the self-motivation of wanting to be out into that world where you work long hours, they're usually off hours, they're usually holidays, they're all the things that most people go, well, gee, why would you want to do that? Because you have to want to. It has to push your mind forward to say, I'm doing something meaningful. I am an essential component of which this industry is. It's an essential industry in order to protect the food supply chains for all of the globe. So what we do here in the United States certainly has an effect on what happens around the globe. Many eyes are upon the U.S., particularly because we are so diligent in what we do, and we are certainly passionate at what we do, and we like to make sure that the bar remains high and that we have this product for many years to come.
Yes, I like that answer. That's a nice answer. Yeah, and I agree. We do protect the world's food supply, and that's very important. So,
it's essential.
Yeah, and there's a lot of pride in a job well done.
It's a very unique industry, and I'm very proud to be part of it.
Yep. So. All right, well, Herb, that's all I had for you. I really appreciate you taking some time to talk to me today.
Thanks.
I want to thank Herb Yeaman for discussing the continued use of phosphine in the U.S. I think it's interesting that we've managed to keep a molecule like phosphine viable and effective for so many years. And it sure looks like it will continue to be that viable option for many years to come. Next time, we'll dive into another fumigant available on the market, methyl bromide. And I think that episode will be extremely interesting as there are a lot of restrictions to its use. In the meantime, if you have any questions at all about this episode's topic or any other questions relating to the industry, please make sure to reach out to us. You can find us at degeschamerica.com or on all of the main social media outlets. And you can also feel free to email us at info@degeschamerica.com. And so, until next time, I'm Ben Harrell, and I hope you have a safe and terrific day.